Hi, Jim. I figured it's a lot easier to put a tape on the machine and do it this way than trying to type out a letter, which I'll just about probably never get around to. So let me just say it was nice hearing from you, and I'm sorry to hear that things aren't going too well at NAB so far as you're getting another position there or a better job than you have. And I sympathize completely with you, Jim, because I am going through, in another way, pretty much the same type thing you are in my endeavors to get further into this business. So the only thing I can say is I sympathize with you completely. It's an unfortunate thing in this business, but no matter which level you're working at, whether you're just beginning or whether you've been in it 12 or 13 years as I have, you're always looking for the next step up, and it always seems impossible to achieve, and then suddenly one day it happens. I don't know what the situation at NAB is. All I can remember back to is my first year or so in the business was up in Hornell, New York, and I happened to be lucky to be in a small station, in a small market, where experience really didn't count. It was just so if you worked hard and were enthusiastic about what you did, you got the opportunities to do a lot of things which you wouldn't have in a larger market. Now, I'm saying this because not knowing the situation at NAB, but knowing the town, if you were at a station, say, in Oyster Bay, Long Island, let's just take a city, for instance, where it is a smaller station than NAB, you would probably have more opportunities to be somebody, to get that afternoon show or the morning show or the midday show that you won't be getting at NAB because you haven't had the experience that they are probably looking for. Now, the next thing, of course, you're probably going to say, well, the guy that got the show that you wanted was, had no more experience than you did. This same sort of thing used to happen to me a lot, Jim, and today it still does, in a sense. Somebody steps ahead of me and gets something that I want. Somebody did when I was just beginning in the business. But in the long run, and this sounds like a crock of baloney, but it's true. In the long run, everything happens for the best, and I believe it completely. In fact, for the past, ever since I got out here on the coast, I've believed that, mainly thinking back to how I got to the coast. I was convinced working at ICC in Bridgeport was the greatest thing that ever happened to me until I had been there a couple of years. And then suddenly I felt there was no other place but New York for me, that I had to make New York. Well, I started pounding on doors in New York and sending auditions, and I wanted the job that a lot of other guys were getting. Every time I was turned down for some guy who didn't have what I considered at that time half as good a show as I had, it made me feel real bad. Then after about, it was after I'd been in the business, something like 6 or 7 years, suddenly the opportunity came to work out here on the coast for CBS. They heard my show from New York, they liked it, and they brought me out to do it. And suddenly I realized that if I had gotten those jobs in New York that I was really what I thought I was ready for, I wouldn't have been ready for the step up at the time. I didn't have enough experience. I wasn't self-confident enough. There are a lot of things that go into it. And in fact, I've even said to the boss a couple of times over the past 5 or 6 years, 6 years ago when I came out here to KNX, I really wasn't, truthfully now as I look back, ready for the step to what I am now in. I developed into it, I feel, and for the past 3 years I've been doing what I felt I was doing 6 years ago, but I wasn't. In other words, my own mind was about 3 years ahead of what my actual performance was. And the only thing I can say is, comparatively speaking, thinking back now to when I first began in this business, I've always been that way, and I guess we all are, and that's why people keep on trying to get ahead, because they believe they are capable of doing such and such a job, and eventually you do become capable, and then the opportunity comes and you can handle it. But the only thing I can say, and here again I hate sounding like a father talking to you, Jim, because we're not that far apart in age, but when you get real discouraged, the only thing you can think of is eventually what you're looking for is going to happen, and by the time it does happen, you'll be that much better along the way to what you should be in this business. I know right now I'm trying like hell to get into the movie end of this business or into the comedy acting end of it, and nobody will look at me for beans. All they want to do is make me an MC, because this is probably the easiest thing right now. I'm capable of being an MC on any of these TV shows. I know it, and I'm not 3 years ahead of my thinking in this particular category, because what I've been doing for the past 13 years is very close to what they want me to do in TV. But that's not what I want. I want to do the comedy acting thing. Well, now, maybe 3 years from now, I will be in the comedy acting, and I will have gotten enough experience. And right now, I really don't have the experience, and that's the reason why they pass me up and hire the guys that have been around for a long time, like the Tony Randalls and the Jack Lemmons and the Gig Youngs and the rest of these guys that do light comedy. I don't know, after all this, after I've been talking here for about 5 minutes, I hope you understand what I'm saying, Jim, that in your own mind you feel you're as good as the guy that got the job, and maybe you are. Maybe there's another reason. Maybe there's a personality conflict. But my advice, and you can chuck it out the window if you want, is don't ever get discouraged and do as a lot of the guys have done in this business that I've worked with along the way and who are still back in the Hornells and the East Podunks. They get a little bit PO'd at the boss and suddenly walk into the front office and say, if I can't have what I want, I'm going to quit. And they're out in the cold, and then they don't even have a job as good as what they were quitting. This has happened more than once. I've seen it happen to so many guys in the business. And for various reasons, they get discouraged. They feel that the boss doesn't like them for a certain reason, or there's a raise that's due and everybody gets it but him. I know I've felt this way many, many times. But I just swallow my pride and keep on trudging along and try to do a better job and keep on improving. And experience is the only thing. Tonight, for instance, I went to see Bobby play a Little League ball game. And Bobby right now is, he'll be 11 the end of June. And he feels pretty discouraged tonight because he was only up once and he struck out. The other kids in the team, because he happens to be in Little League, and in Little League they have both major and minor, he happens to be on a major league team this year. Last year he played in a minor league team because he was only 9.5. Well, now he's 10.5 and he's up with the bigger kids. So now he is up with the major league kids, but not capable of playing like a 12-year-old because he's not. He feels he should be, and he gets awfully discouraged because he doesn't have the experience. In his own mind, he really figures if he is just given a chance, he can really prove it, and he probably will, eventually, after he gets more experience. The only thing I can say, Jim, is don't get discouraged and just keep on plugging along, and what you want will eventually be yours. There's nothing to stop it if you just keep on working hard, and by working hard, I mean doing the best job you possibly can. Keep on listening to a lot of different guys. I don't know whether you do that much radio listening yourself. I know when I first got into this business, I was a radio fan ever since I was around 9 or 10. So thus, the day I decided I wanted to get into radio when I was around 18 or 19, I had already had in mind a lot of the guys and their styles without ever having really sat down and said to myself, well, now this is what I want to be. I suddenly thought, well, all these things that I had been thinking of, like the Martin Blocks and the Jerry Marshalls and the different disc jockeys in New York City that I thought were real great, or the guys I used to hear from the Midwest. There was a guy, Hal Morgan, who's still in the business, who when I first got in the business, I used to listen to this Hal Morgan in Cleveland, and I picked up a little device that Morgan was using out in Cleveland of talking over intros to records. I started doing this when I was up in Hornell. I talked over the intro. So rather than have dead air, I'd be talking, and as soon as the vocal came in, I would stop talking. Being a drummer and knowing music, I was able to do this without ever having heard a record. I would just put the record on and know if the intro was going to last 4 measures or 8 measures. I could just feel when the vocal was going to begin. So thus it was an easy thing for me to adapt. Since that time, I've worked on that particular thing without even thinking about it today. Somebody once said to me, why do you always talk over intros of records? For no reason, except that in doing comedy as I do, after we pull a punchline, we go to a record, and there's music playing, and rather than make it seem like, well, now I just pulled a punchline, folks, so I'm going to shut up and sit back and while you laugh, because maybe they aren't laughing, I always will wait a couple of seconds after we hit with the music and come in over the top and make a comment of some kind that pertains. I've enclosed the record of my anniversary show, the 5th anniversary show we did about a year ago out here. And I hope, I forget now what's on the record, but there might be something on there that will show you what I mean. But what I'm trying to say is just a little teensy thing that I heard a guy in Cleveland, Hal Morgan, doing. I adapted. All along the line, I would hear guys, and not purposely sit down and say, gee, I'm going to copy that, but I would pick up little things from them. And this is a great way to learn. It's the same way I'm trying to learn now by watching different guys in stage plays, comedy roles that I think that I could play. I'll watch them and watch their mannerisms. Not that I'll ever adapt them, but I want to see what they're doing right and mostly what they're doing wrong in my own mind so that I won't make the same mistake. This is very good practice. Now, I don't know whether that's the route you want to go or you're still very interested in sports, Jim, because here again, in sports, you just follow along the same route. Listen to all the guys, and I don't mean just the Mel Allens and the Red Barbers and the rest, but even the guys that stink up in the hills. You can pick up a lot of little different things from the guy who's absolutely the worst. You may find him doing something that you can adapt to your own style. These are all things that you can use as you go along. You drop what you feel isn't right, and you pick up new things, and eventually you start developing your own style. The tape you sent me a couple of months ago, I listened to, and it sounded real good. As I said to Ann, in listening to it, I could picture myself when the first couple of years I was in the business at about that same level, and I was saying, gee, Jimmy has really come along. Because I can remember when you were sitting in the backyard at Baba's on the swing there, and I never thought I'd be an announcer or a disc jockey or a comedian at the time, no more than you probably did. So thus I was quite surprised and quite enthused about what you had on that tape. I liked it very much. It's one of those things, though, Jim, but you're not today at 2 or 3 years or however long you've been in the business now, you're not as far along as the guy who's been in the business 10 years, and nobody would expect you to be. It's impossible. I know when I was in the business 2 or 3 years, I thought I was as good as the guy that had been in the business 10 years, but now that I've been in it 12 or 13, I realize there is a difference. You can't just put your finger on it, but there is, and it all comes with experience. It comes with relaxing, and it all comes with timing. All of the things that, whether it's baseball or whether it's hockey or whether it's volleyball or whether it's playing records and talking, timing is a big important thing. I don't mean timing so far as your career goes, because that's a big important thing too. You have to be in the right place at the right time. But in your own performance on the air, once you get into a certain groove and a certain timing, the listeners will know it sounds good, and you'll know it sounds good because it feels good. And they don't know why it feels good to them to listen to you or it sounds good, but it will. Everything smooths out. Everything becomes a lot better. I don't mean to sound like a preacher here, Jim, but I hope I'm helping you to understand why you shouldn't get discouraged and feel that NAB is not offering everything that you think should be coming your way. It might come your way at NAB, or it might come somewhere else, but it takes time. So don't be discouraged, and for God's sakes, don't quit, Jim, because that could be the worst thing you could do. The longer you stay there, the more experience you get, and the more prepared you'll be for your next step up. You mentioned about coming to the coast, Jim, and the only thing I can say here again, the same as I said at the beginning of this tape, being in Hornell, New York was a hell of a lot better for me than being in Bridgeport when I first started. It took me about 2 years to get to Bridgeport, so thus I got 2 years' experience up in the hills, and I mean the sticks. There were only 18,000 people in Hornell, but I got to do a lot of things. I got a lot of experience. So sometimes it's better to be with a lousy station and be the old line about the big fish in the little pond or the little fish in the big pond, and it really applies in this particular sense. Out here on the coast, everything is thought of in a big way. There are a lot of stations out here that could probably use a fellow like yourself. I have no doubt that you could get a job at a couple of stations in the outlying areas here. But you wouldn't make any more money than you're making back in Bridgeport, and the standard of living is a lot higher out here. When I was back east and first coming out here, everybody told me, gee, it's a lot easier to live on the coast. It's a lot cheaper. Well, that's a lot of bull. It is not. the standard of living out here is a lot different because of the climate, and in the same sense, the homes are just as expensive. The apartments are even more expensive. The life is very active out here. There's a lot of things to do, and I don't know, truthfully, whether even if you got a job out here, Jim, whether you could further your career, because here again you'd be rushing into a market where, for instance, I know myself, I never listen to the outlying stations. I never hear any of these stations around here that would hire a fellow with your amount of experience. So I wouldn't know what the hell they're doing or how good the guy. I've heard of. Occasionally I'll go by one of the stations on the dial, but I won't listen to it long because I have no reason to. And very seldom will they pick from one of these other stations to bring up to the bigger stations here in Hollywood or L.A. They usually go after a guy that's made it big in Cleveland, or a guy that's made it big they take a big city in Texas, or Salt Lake City, or San Francisco. So the chances of making it to a bigger station in a big market such as L.A. Are pretty slim until you've gone through the middle market. Now, I happen to be fortunate, like I said, in my career, the timing was right. I happened to be in the right place at the right time, so that each step came gradually. It was a year up on the sticks in Hornell, and then it was a few months up in Bristol. Then I happened to end up in Bridgeport after I'd been in the business about a year and a half, and I really wasn't ready for Bridgeport yet, and I was on a small station. See, there was a third station in Bridgeport at the time, WLIZ, and it was the nothing station in town. And I happened to be fortunate there because with 3 stations in town, the other 2 stations, NAB and ICC, were the big kingpins. LIZ was the nothing station, and they were trying all different things to be successful. So thus, when I arrived, they had just fired everybody. And I got a lot of experience right off because they allowed me to do things that they wouldn't have allowed me if there had been, if it had been a big station, in other words. Well, the thing is, I grew with ICC, or rather, I grew with LIZ. After I'd been there a year, they bought out WICC, and I suddenly found myself the morning man on one of the biggest stations in Connecticut after I'd only been in the business 2 or 3 years. But here again, it was the thing of being in the right place at the right time. After I had been on the morning show in Bridgeport on ICC for about 3 years, then I really started being worthy of the position. But it happened that I happened to be there when they didn't have anybody else around, and it was a case of really working hard. I didn't just work on my shift. Now, I'm not suggesting you do this because, you know, not everybody's a complete kook. But when I first got in the business up in Hornell, I used to work from 8 o'clock in the morning until midnight every night. And at that time, Ann was living back in Connecticut, so thus I could devote all those hours to my job. And I used to go back to the station and pick out records and plan shows that never went on, just to be doing things. I loved radio that much, and I was constantly listening to guys. So thus when I got to Bridgeport, I was here again listening to guys and working like crazy from, well, when I went to LIZ, I was working the whole day long there. And then ICC was the same thing. I never wanted to go home. I just wanted to stay at the station. And finally, after a few years, enough guys were canned because they were impatient for stardom, and I suddenly found myself as the kingpin at ICC. And then the last 2 years I was there, I was getting offers to go to bigger stations, the next step up. I was offered a job in Boston and Cleveland and Baltimore and whatnot, but I didn't want those jobs. I felt that I wanted New York, that eventually New York would ask for me. And what happened, it was a good thing I didn't take these other jobs and contracts that would have offered me a lot of money, but they were 2 or 3 year contracts. And I didn't take them, and suddenly in 1956 I got a call from the coast here. Somebody in New York, WCBS in New York, had sent a tape of me out here to the coast. They liked it, and I ended up coming out here. And the first 2 years out here were a son of a bee. It was rough. And I don't mean so far as my position goes, because I had a firm contract, but so far as relaxing and adapting myself to this particular market. And there were many times I felt like chucking the whole thing, but I didn't because I loved radio that much. I hope I haven't gone on too long here, Jim. I do hope you understand what I'm saying, that if you really stay there and knock yourself out, it's going to pay you off in the end. If you were to move out to the coast here and get a job in a smaller station, Jim, I don't think that you'd really have it any better than what you have back there, plus the opportunities wouldn't be as great. Because like I said, they just don't pick. The real good stations out here that pay good money don't pick from the little stations. They go out of town. They hire from Cleveland and Chicago and so on. I hope that you and and your fiance are still going ahead with the November marriage, and I hope you'll drop me a line, or maybe you can drop me a tape, the same as I'm doing to you, Jim. I'd love to hear from you. Give the rest of the family my very best, and Ann and the kids and my mother and father were all just great. The climate out here, the living, everything is just great, Jim. Best of everything, and let me hear from you.